Across the 3.7 billion years that our big blue marble has been home to life, it's seen some utter freaks. So from outlandish creatures you'll be sad or extinct to horrifying monsters you'll wish were long gone, here's some of the most bizarre creatures to ever exist. Horsey see, horsey do. It's funny, the more I look at horses, the stranger they seem. You know what else I think are unsettling? Gorillas. So I sure would hate it if there was some kind of horse-gorilla hybrid out there. Well, there was. Thankfully though, we missed them by a few million years. Anisodon, known previously as Chalicotherium grande, was a prehistoric mammal with a hulking horse/gorilla-like body. These beasties weighed almost as much as a modern cow and stood around 6 feet tall. Active during the late Miocene period between 5 and 23 million years ago, this family of freaks were native to Europe where they bumbled around grazing on vegetation. Anisodon had short back legs with hooves like a modern horse, but long, strong forearms like a gorilla. Rather than hooves, the arms ended with sharp claws that were folded inwards while it walked, so it walked on its knuckles like an ape. It was a literal knuckle dragger, though I probably wouldn't say that to its face, because those claws were excellent defensive weapons. Yet with size, strength, and power, there was very little that could threaten this horserilla in its heyday. Indeed, it only went extinct at the beginning of the Pliocene period due to the deadly combo of new, more efficient predators and climate change. I'm kinda sad we can't see folks taking part in show jumping competitions on the backs of these things. A real poop talker. People often tell me that I talk out of my butt. Shocking, right? Well, I wouldn't be the first creature to do it. Brace yourself because this is Saccharidus, an early Cambrian era thing with a big mouth and no anus. You get what I'm saying? It's probable that this sickly sack both fed and excreted from the same hole. I hope they hadn't evolved taste buds back then. Thankfully, Saccharidus were only a little over a millimeter, so you wouldn't have got a good look at that terrifying face. Then again, they lived on the seafloor, so even if they were around today, you'd be hard-pressed to even find them. The actual lifestyle of the Saccharidus is shrouded in mystery. Heck, scientists believe that it was our oldest ancestor at one point. I know. Don't worry, you aren't actually related to this handsome fella. It's more likely that it was an early ancestor of crabs and spiders than humans. Even if Cousin Bob does look a lot like the sack monster. It seems the unsettling bean beast was most likely a predator, using its spikes to help it capture prey. As for what it ate, we have no idea. Considering it lived some 500 million years ago, it's incredibly hard to say. Part of me can't help but feel like that's for the best. The less I know about this whack sack, the better. But if there's one thing you should definitely know more about, it's today's sponsor. There's a whole host of bizarre creatures to discover in Beastlord: The New Land. With a realistic painting style, this animal-themed strategy mobile game lets players dive into a vivid world of crazy creatures and brutal beasts. With over 500 of them to collect, you're sure to find the right creatures to defend your territory and fight for supremacy. Keep exploring, expanding, and competing with other players. And if you start playing right now, you're in for a treat. Logging in for just 2 consecutive days will net you the Lion, a supremely powerful beastie. The Lion is a melee-focused combat hero with a completely unique command ability that provides bonuses to your beast squad, the perfect creature for beginners. Not only does the Lion increase your expedition quantity and the attack and defense of your squad, but it also gives itself a boost whenever it's in the lead. If you want my advice, I'd focus on cultivating your Lion early. That'll help you on your journey through the animal kingdom. Download the game today using the link in the description and then enter the unique code BL777 for some extra in-game goodies. Now on with more freaky beasties. Touchy-feely. In the ancient seas of the mid-Cambrian era swam a creature so peculiar that it defied classification for years. 5 mushroom-shaped eyes, a backwards-facing mouth, and a segmented trunk with a claw at the end. I'm talking about Opabinia, a 2.8-inch long mistake of nature. It's theorized that this soft-bodied sea critter was a bottom feeder, so it may have swum around the ocean floor using that clawed trunk to pick up small prey like worms and bring them to its mouth. While scientists still debate the classification of Opabinia, the current thinking is that it was a very early ancestor to arthropods, the group that insects and crustaceans belong to. You can't really blame the experts for not knowing where to place this thing. I mean, just look at it. Infamously, when the species was first described in a presentation in 1975, it was met with hysterical laughter from scientists. I mean, I don't think it's that hilarious, but they're a boring bunch, aren't they? The Opabinia probably went extinct at the end of the Cambrian era because of environmental changes, depriving the world of one of its most confusing critters. Rest in peace, you beautiful weirdo. Platypusasaurus. The Triassic period may as well be known as the Era of the Odd. After a colossal extinction known as the Great Dying some 252 million years ago, much of life had to essentially start from scratch, leading to some crazy experiments by Mother Nature. One of those experiments was the Erythromoropus, a strange marine reptile that had a long lizard-like body, flippers like a seal, and a bill like a platypus. As if this wasn't weird enough, its back was adorned with stegosaurus-like plates and it had a small head with tiny little eyes. I can't stress how utterly bizarre this guy was. And totally useless. Despite its flippers, it was probably a poor swimmer due to its long bony body and terrible eyesight, and at just 28 inches it wasn't exactly intimidating. Safe to say, if this thing existed in any other era, it'd never have survived. But luckily for our build bud, it lived in the Triassic. See, there was very little competition in this post-mass extinction world and every niche was up for grabs. So what did it do to survive given how much it sucked? Well, like modern platypuses, Erythromoropus had a large hole in the middle of its bill. Platypuses house special receptors here that allow them to hunt in poor visibility by detecting their prey's movement and any small electrical signals their muscles give off when they contract. Cool. So it's likely this prehistoric reptile did the same. Only less successfully given that it's extinct. The tube. Man, the seas of the mid-Cambrian period were full of disgusting creatures. This grotesque worm is Atoia, a burrowing, carnivorous beast that snatched unfortunate prey using its freaky tube mouth. Gross. Sounds like a literal nightmare, huh? Thankfully, these creatures weren't the huge sci-fi monsters you might imagine in Dune, because they were just 6 inches long. Though I imagine that wasn't much solace for the poor little critters Atoia guzzled up back in the day. The horrific animal is actually an ancient ancestor of modern-day priapulid worms, which are also known by a more phallic name. Gee, I wonder why. To hunt, Atoia would dig a U-shaped burrow on the sea floor and hide inside with its head peeking out. Then when prey wandered too close, it would extend its proboscis, that terrible tube I mentioned, and using that tube of doom, our grotesque friend would grab the unsuspecting morsel and drag it towards its mouth before swallowing it head first. But Atoia wasn't fussy. It'd happily scavenge on leftovers if need be. Heck, it'd even engage in cannibalism if food was super scarce, a trait shared by modern priapulid worms. And just when I thought they couldn't get more charming. Family traditions are important, I guess. Antarctic abomination. Okay, so prehistoric Earth housed one skin-crawling worm some 500 million years ago. Big deal. Terrifying creatures like Atoia have been resigned to the trash can of history, right? Wrong. Say hello to the Antarctic scale worm. Good God! Lurking a dizzying 2,000 feet below the surface of the Antarctic Ocean right now, the scale worm is a predatory deep-sea creature that gets its name from those horrific tooth-like scales covering its body. Not that they're the most horrific part of this creature, that goes to its head. Oh no, sorry, that isn't its head. It's actually a retractable proboscis that the scale worm can unfurl like something out of Alien. It'll extend this proboscis and use it to grab any unfortunate prey that comes near before tearing it apart with those sharp mouth parts. Haha, sounds a lot like our old pal Atoia, doesn't it? Unlike Atoia though, scale worms have these bizarre golden bristles running along their bodies. They're called chaetae. and they help propel the abdominal animals through the water as well as bury them within the sediment to wait for prey. Thanks, I hate it. What's worse, at 8 inches long, they're about the same size as a rat. Ugh. We actually know frighteningly little else about these sea demons, though. Their extreme habitat makes it tricky for researchers to study them. Good riddance, I say. Let them stay down there. Big mouth. Pterosaurs are iconic prehistoric beasts. These super impressive reptiles evolved the power of flight and were prevalent throughout the reign of the dinosaurs. But some of them were a little less impressive and a little more improbable. Take the Dimorphodon. Despite sounding like a transformer, this unusual-looking creature was a pterosaur from the early Jurassic period, about 200 to 145 million years ago. Unlike other pterosaurs, Dimorphodons had massively oversized heads that took up almost a third of their 3.3-foot length. What a whopper! Because of this, scientists reckon that they may not have been very skilled flyers. Their big heads plus a relatively short wingspan meant rather than flying for long distances, they likely relied on short bursts of airtime from tree to tree. Sure, they were probably great climbers and could walk competently on the ground, but that's not so impressive compared to flying. Native to what's now North America and Europe, Dimorphodon would have snapped up small vertebrates, insects, and whatever carrion it came across. Using its huge eyes, it would have been able to spy potential prey from high up in the treetops, and when it saw something, it'd soar down and snatch it using its specialized jaw. See, Dimorphodon means two-formed tooth. At the top of its mouth had long teeth with serrated edges, probably designed for catching prey, and at the bottom were shorter ones for grinding it up into goo. Impressive, but we shouldn't tell him so. Might get him an even bigger head. Sporkophant. Nature experimented a whole lot before it struck gold with the elephant. Its many prehistoric counterparts were outlandish to say the least. Backwards-facing tusks, quadruple-speared ones. The design was clearly a work in progress. But the strangest of all was probably the Platybelodon, an elephant with a giant spork mouth. The shovel-faced mammal lived during the mid-Miocene era in Africa, Asia, North America, and the Caucasus, and was a tad smaller than modern elephants. Platybelodons reached 10 feet tall and weighed up to 3 tons, whereas African bush elephants can reach 24 feet and weigh 7 tons. But okay, I hear ya. You want to know what the deal is with this weird face, don't you? There, Platyby, I've been asked the same thing many times. Well, researchers once believed these guys were swamp dwellers, so the theory was that this beast used its flattened tusks to uproot swampland vegetation and funnel it into its mouth. A sound idea, sure, but that's no longer considered accurate. Nowadays, it's accepted that the Platybelodon fed on foliage in small trees, using its tusks to strip away bark or even saw off branches, like some kind of prehistoric lumberjack, only less ruggedly handsome. Marine megafauna. The Triassic era saw the birth of the ichthyosaurs, freaky prehistoric reptiles that looked like giant lizardfish. These marine menaces had the largest eyes ever recorded in the animal kingdom at an astonishing 10 inches wide, almost double that of a blue whale. This meant they were excellent at seeking out prey like squids. There were over 100 species of ichthyosaur, but the craziest were those belonging to the Shastasaurus genus, because they were absolutely enormous. How enormous? Well, we don't know the exact size of our reptilian friend. There are only limited fossil remains left, but scaling estimates show us that it could have reached a seriously intimidating 69 feet long. That's bigger than a cricket pitch. Jeez. Alright, so that still doesn't measure up to the blue whale's max length of 98 feet, but it's still scarily big. At least old Shastasaurus would comfortably thrash Big Blue at the opticians. Doesn't sound that impressive, does it? Terrible hands. In 1965, a research team in Mongolia discovered this horrifying fossil. At a mind-blowing 8 feet long, these are the biggest arms of any dinosaur ever found. To put that into context, that means each one is the same size as Robert Wadlow, the tallest man to have ever lived. Crikey. Naturally, people's immediate thought was the arm bones belonged to some terrifying predatory monster. a nightmare carnivore that grabbed its prey and tore it apart with its bare hands. But the reality would prove even stranger. See, the bones actually belonged to something called a Dinochirus, and it was the most outlandish dinosaur ever. This late Cretaceous omnivore stood 16 feet tall and was around 33 feet long. That's longer than a London bus. Covered in feathers, it sported a weird duckbill, lumpy hunchback, potbelly, and long neck. So it wasn't just huge, it was a huge goofball. Not that it cared. This big boy was so swole that it only needed to worry about being hunted by massive tyrannosaurs. Nothing else could touch it. So what's the deal with those arms? Well, Dinochirus probably fed on fish and vegetation, so the long clawed arms would have helped it dig and gather plants. Not exactly the monster it was originally thought to be then. Stones found near where its digestive tract would have been suggest it swallowed them to grind the foliage in its gizzard, as well as strip the scales from fish. And that wide duck-like bill makes sense to help it catch said fish, the fat from which it may have stored in its hump in times of scarcity. So all those freaky features actually make a lot of sense. Man, it still doesn't seem like a dinosaur to me though, or like some kind of alien duck bear. The abnormal shrimp. Long ago, deep beneath the turbulent waves of the Cambrian era, swam a spine-chilling apex predator. With creepy, grasping appendages, huge eyes, and a circular mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth, this was the Anomalocaris, or the abnormal shrimp. If you're anything like me, you probably think that's a stupid name for such a scary beast, huh? Well, initially, only one of the beast's appendages were discovered, and scientists thought that they were looking at a strange species of prehistoric shrimp. Nowadays, they're more clued up, and we know that although Anomalocaris was an early arthropod, it wasn't a shrimp at all. For starters, a shrimp wouldn't be able to bite your finger off. Once thought to have hunted trilobites on the seafloor, this thing probably actually preyed on soft-bodied organisms like worms. It'd scoop up unsuspecting creatures using its grabby bits and place them directly in its mouth where they'd be shredded. Plus, the Abnormophila had some of the greatest eyesight ever known, bested only by the modern-day dragonfly. This incredible eyesight helped Anomalocaris become one of the first ever super predators, dominating the waters with 20/20 vision and deft speed. This would have forced other creatures to adapt to survive and probably helped kickstart the evolutionary arms race between predator and prey that would go on to shape life on Earth. Jeez, no joke then. It's speculated that this pseudo-shrimp reached lengths of a little over a foot, not including its bendy appendages and tail. Whilst that doesn't sound that big, we're talking 500 million years ago here, so it was one of the largest living things of the era. Man, I'm glad to be a soft-bodied boy in the present. I wouldn't have lasted long back in the Cambrian with this guy around. Why the long neck? In the lawless world of the Triassic, where anything went no matter how stupid, lived Tanystropheus. Native to what is now Europe, the Middle East, and China, this unhinged-looking reptile was around 20 feet long, with almost half of that comprising of that colossal neck. Scientists think Tanystropheus was semi-aquatic, spending some of its life standing on the shoreline, sticking its big neck out like an amateur angler. See, the outrageously long neck meant it could reach far from shore to pluck fish without even having to get into the sea. The rest of its day-to-day was spent below the waves, getting up close and personal with its unfortunate quarry, prehistoric fish and squid. I mean, I get the point of the long neck, I do, but it's a little much, don't you think? Evolution thought so too. The neck is a vulnerable spot for most animals. It's one thing for a colossal 40-foot tall dinosaur like a Brachiosaurus to have a long neck. It's pretty safe considering it's freaking huge. But on a much shorter animal like Tanystropheus, which stood barely 2 feet tall, the neck was a massive target. Indeed, paleontologists have discovered several fossils with big bite marks taken out of the necks. And so our overly long friend didn't exactly prosper. It only lasted around 20 million years. That sounds like a lot, but in terms of a species' longevity, it definitely isn't. What a world! You stick your neck out for yourself and look what happens. Pucker up. Let's jump forward to modern day again now, though that doesn't mean it's gonna get any less weird. In the waters surrounding the Galapagos Islands lives what I can only describe as a goblin fish frog with kissy lips. Think I'm joking? Think again. This is the red-lipped batfish, and it's super uncomfortable looking. These 10-inch long ghouls prefer to stick to the ocean floor where they can walk about using leg-like flippers. Yep, this fish prefers to walk. If it ever does decide to swim, those flippers splay out to the sides like wings and it slowly moves forward with an awkward wiggling motion. Who ever heard of a fish that sucks at swimming? And as for that big old honker, well, it isn't actually a nose at all. In lieu of being able to chase its prey, it emits a sort of chemical lure from the fleshy stub which attracts shrimp, mollusks, and smaller fish for it to chow down on. Okay, but what about the big red lips that gave this thing its name? What are they for? In truth, we don't really know. Some researchers believe that these rosy smackers are used for attracting mates, but more work is needed to find the truth. All I know is that it makes them look simply dashing. You know, for a hideous goblin fish. Wish I could pull off that color. A false monarch? Basilosaurus, meaning king lizard, was one of the most terrifying reptiles to ever live, and one of the deadliest predators of its era. A marine reptile, it scoured the oceans for prey during the age of the dinosaurs while... No, wait. Hang on. Turns out the name king lizard is incredibly inaccurate. Initially, Basilosaurus was misclassified. It was actually a mammal, the first whale to live entirely at sea. That's right, whales, or at least their ancestors, were once small furry land dwellers that spent a lot of time in and around water. Over millions of years, they slowly spent less and less time on dry land as they lost their fur and their claws turned to flippers. On top of this, nutrient-rich waters enabled them to gain mass, growing in size substantially. Basilosaurus first appeared fully evolved in the Middle Eocene period, where it was an apex predator. So it was definitely a king, just not a lizard. Unsurprisingly, this ancient whale was frickin' huge. They could grow up to a whopping 59 feet in length and hunted sharks, large fish, and even other prehistoric whales that followed them into the sea. Unlike modern whales, however, it wasn't equipped for deeper waters, spending its time closer to the surface. Plus, for all its power and menace, it was probably a bit of a moron. Its brain was small in comparison to its descendants, so it's unlikely to have evolved the social capabilities of the whales and dolphins we know today. I doubt that something as scary as this would have been able to make many friends anyway. Freak face. Okay, and back to the Triassic for another weirdo. The Anopodontatus was the very first marine reptile known to be herbivorous. Though I'm willing to bet the first things you noticed about it are its 9-foot-long wiggly body and that hammer-shaped face. The peculiar shape is thought to have allowed Anopodontatus to effectively scrape algae and vegetation from the seabed using long rows of small chisel-like teeth. After sucking up the grub, the teeth would act like a filter, allowing water to be pushed out of its mouth while keeping the food inside. Originally, researchers were convinced this guy looked even more abnormal. Rather than a hammerhead, it was initially suggested that it had a more flamingo-shaped one with zipper-like teeth running down the middle. That's oddly terrifying. Turns out this wasn't the case, though. The first Anopodontatus skull discovered had been crushed and deformed, giving a false impression. Not that the real thing is much less odd. While it spent most of its life in the water, it was also perfectly capable of spending time on land, though it was in danger of getting eaten by large archosaurs. Truth be told, it didn't fare much better in the seas either. It had no proper way of defending itself against ichthyosaurs. The species went extinct after just 7 million years. Pfft, loser. The flying giraffe. According to all known laws of aviation, there is no way a bee should be able to fly. At least according to Bee Movie, which of course means it's nonsense. A much more impressive beast to take flight is this absolute unit right here. Meet Quetzalcoatlus, the largest animal to ever take to the skies. How large are we talking? Glad you asked. At an utterly mind-blowing 18 feet, this colossal pterosaur was around the same height as a giraffe, and its maximum wingspan is estimated at 36 feet. That's about the same as a modern fighter jet. But let me reiterate, this thing was able to fly without jet engines. Due to its massive size, it needed a jumping start, but by hopping a casual 8 feet into the air, its powerful wings could do the rest and get it airborne. The bird-like behemoth was around during the late Cretaceous era and hunted on the ground, swiping up small vertebrates such as baby dinosaurs as well as plucking fish and crustaceans from inland streams. Sorta like a humongous heron. Jeepers, imagine having a giraffe-sized reptile coming at you with that gargantuan beak. Nope, I can't think of anything more horrifying. Maybe somebody up there agreed with me and decided to hurl a meteor the size of a city at the Earth to make sure the problem was solved. Well, I don't know about you, but I've had my fill of freakies for one day. Which of those guys did you think was the weirdest? Let me know down in the comments below, and I'll see you all in the next one. Thanks for watching.